My mother kept that trunk locked for 37 years. When she died last month, my sisters divided up her $16 million jewelry collection while I stood there watching. Roland gets the trunk, Portia announced with that familiar smirk. Mother specifically said so. They laughed as they walked out with their fortune. But when I finally broke open that worthless old trunk, I found something that made their millions look like pocket change. A stack of letters, all addressed to me, all unopened. The first line of the top letter made my legs give out. Dear Roland, if you're reading this, Beatrice is dead, and it's finally time you learned the truth. You were stolen from us when you were 5 years old. My name is Roland Vance, or, at least, that's what I've believed for 42 years. I teach music at Jefferson Middle School in Connecticut, where kids call me Mr. V, and parents thank me for having patience with their tone-deaf children. It's not the life my mother wanted for me, but then again, nothing I did ever measured up to her expectations. Growing up in the Vance family was like being cast in a play where everyone knew their roles except me. My mother, Beatrice Vance, built a jewelry empire from scratch, or so she told everyone at those endless charity galas. She'd stand there in her designer gowns, dripping in diamonds, telling the story of how she started with one small store and built it into a chain worth millions. My sisters, Portia and Cordelia, were her perfect supporting actresses. Portia, 3 years older than me, became a corporate lawyer who could negotiate a deal that would make sharks weep. Cordelia, 4 years younger, turned into a fashion designer whose jewelry designs were featured in every major magazine. And then there was me, Roland, the son who preferred teaching kids to play hot cross buns on recorders over learning the family business. The one who'd rather spend Saturday mornings at school band practice than at the country club. The disappointment. My father, Gerald, died when I was 15. Heart attack at his desk, calculator in hand, working on tax returns even on a Sunday. He was a quiet man who seemed to shrink a little more each year, as if life with Beatrice was slowly erasing him. After he died, my Uncle Chester stepped in as the family patriarch. Chester Millbrook, my mother's brother, was everything my father wasn't. Loud, commanding, the kind of man who entered a room like he owned it, which he usually did. The trunk had been in my mother's walk-in closet since before I could remember. It sat against the back wall, this old leather thing with brass corners turned green with age. As a kid, I was fascinated by it. What kind of treasure did Mother keep locked away? When I was 8, I asked her about it while she was sorting through her jewelry for a gala. "What's in the trunk, Mother?" She'd turned to me with this cold look that could freeze July. "That's not for you to worry about, Roland. Some things are better left alone." When I was 13, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until everyone was at Portia's debate championship and tried to pick the lock with a bobby pin I'd found. Mother caught me before I could get it open. She didn't yell. She didn't hit me. She just stopped talking to me for an entire month. 30 days of silence at dinner tables, of looking through me like I was glass. That's when I learned that some mysteries weren't worth solving. But now she was dead, lung cancer, though she'd never smoked a day in her life. The funeral was exactly what she would have wanted. Hundreds of people, flowers that cost more than my monthly salary, and a eulogy that painted her as a saint who'd built an empire while raising 3 children alone after her husband's tragic death. The governor himself attended. My sisters sat in the front row, crying perfectly photogenic tears. I sat beside them, feeling nothing but a strange emptiness, like mourning someone I'd never really known. The will reading changed everything. It wasn't just about the trunk, though that was the final insult. It was the way Uncle Chester kept fidgeting, the way the lawyer, Mr. Whitfield, seemed uncomfortable reading my portion, the way my sisters exchanged glances that said they'd known all along what I was getting, or rather, what I wasn't getting. That's how I ended up in Mother's empty bedroom, crowbar in hand, ready to destroy the one thing she'd left me. I thought I'd find old photos maybe, or letters from my father, or even just moldy clothes. I never imagined I'd find proof that my entire life was built on a lie, that the woman I called mother was actually my kidnapper, and that somewhere out there my real family had spent 37 years fighting to get me back. Growing up in the Vance Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was like living in a museum where I was the only exhibit that didn't belong. The house had 14 rooms, each one decorated with the kind of taste that whispered old money, even though Mother had earned every penny herself. Persian rugs covered polished hardwood floors. Original oil paintings hung on walls painted in shades of cream and gold. Every piece of furniture had a pedigree, a story, a reason for being there. Everything except me. My earliest memory is from when I was 6 years old, sitting at our massive dining table while Mother coached Portia through her multiplication tables. "Excellence is not optional in this family," Mother said, her perfectly manicured nails tapping the mahogany. 12 times 12, 144, Portia answered without hesitation. "Good." "Roland, what's 8 times 7? I froze. Numbers had always jumbled in my head like scattered marbles. 52? The silence that followed felt like Judgment Day. Mother's lips pressed into that thin line I'd come to dread. "It's 56, Roland." Portia knew that when she was 5. That set the pattern for the next 36 years. Portia excelled in everything academic. She graduated valedictorian, went to Yale Law, and made partner at Morrison & Associates before she turned 35. At family dinners, Mother would make her recount her latest courtroom victories, while the rest of us listened like disciples at the feet of a prophet. Cordelia found her place through art. She could sketch a perfect rose at age 7, and by 12 was designing jewelry pieces that Mother actually sold in her stores. "This one has vision," Mother would tell her friends, ruffling Cordelia's hair with actual affection. "She understands beauty the way I do." But me? I understood music. The problem was, in the Vance family, music was what the help played in the background during parties. It wasn't a career, it wasn't success. It was just noise. I discovered my love for music by accident when I was 10. The school had a mandatory music class, and the moment I touched the piano keys, something clicked. It was like finding a language I'd always known, but never had the chance to speak. My teacher, Mrs. Patterson, told my parents I had natural talent, that with proper lessons I could be exceptional. Music lessons? Mother had laughed, actually laughed, when Father brought it up at dinner. "Gerald, the boy can barely pass basic math. You want to waste money on piano lessons?" Father, quiet as always, had mumbled something about letting me try. Mother agreed to 1 year of lessons, but only if I maintained straight B's in everything else. I did, barely, and that year turned into 2, then 3, until I was good enough to get a music scholarship to a state college Mother deemed embarrassing but unsurprising. The day I told them I wanted to be a music teacher, you would have thought I'd announced plans to join the circus. It was Thanksgiving, my junior year of college. The whole family was there, including Uncle Chester and his wife Patricia, various cousins and business associates Mother always somehow folded into family gatherings. "A teacher?" Mother had repeated, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. "You're joking." "It's what I love, Mother." "I'm good with kids. I can make a difference." Portia snorted into her wine. "You could make a difference selling $1,000,000 necklaces too, but with better profit margins." Uncle Chester jumped in, his booming voice filling the dining room. "Roland, be realistic. Men in this family run businesses. They don't teach snot-nosed kids to play Mary Had a Little Lamb." Only Father had remained quiet, pushing food around his plate. Later that night I found him in his study. "Follow your heart, son," he'd said, not looking up from his ledgers. God knows I didn't. 6 months later, he was dead. The trunk had always been there, through all of it. Sometimes when I visited Mother during college breaks, I'd see her standing in her closet, just staring at it. Once, after Father's funeral, I caught her with her hand on the lock. tears streaming down her face. It was the only time I ever saw Beatrice Vance cry. "Mother?" I'd asked from the doorway. She'd spun around, wiping her face quickly, transforming back into the Ice Queen I knew. Privacy, Roland. Learn to respect it. As the years passed, I built my own life teaching music at Jefferson Middle School. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. Kids would light up when they finally nailed a difficult piece. Parents would tear up at concerts. I made $60,000 a year and lived in a 2-bedroom apartment 40 minutes from Mother's mansion. To her, I might as well have been living in poverty. At family gatherings, Mother would introduce her children to new people the same way every time. "These are my daughters, Portia and Cordelia," she'd say, listing their achievements like medals of honor. Then, almost as an afterthought, "And this is Roland. He teaches." The reading of Beatrice's will took place 3 days after her funeral in Uncle Chester's office downtown. The building was a monument to old money, all marble floors and leather chairs that cost more than my car. Mr. Whitfield, the family lawyer for 30 years, sat behind Chester's massive oak desk, arranging papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for operation. Portia arrived in her black Mercedes, wearing a designer suit that probably cost $10,000. Cordelia came separately in her Range Rover, draped in jewelry she'd designed herself, each piece a small fortune. I drove my 8-year-old Honda Civic and had to circle the block twice to find street parking because I didn't want to pay the $20 for the garage. "Before we begin," Mr. Whitfield said, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, "I want you all to know that your mother was very specific about her wishes. Everything has been detailed down to the last cent." He started with the smaller bequests. The housekeeper, Marion, who'd worked for Mother for 20 years, received $50,000. Various charities got generous donations. Mother's collection of first edition books went to Yale's library. Each detail was perfectly calculated, perfectly controlled, just like everything else in Beatrice Vance's life. To my eldest daughter, Portia Jane Vance, Mr. Whitfield read, "I leave the flagship stores in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia, along with the entire collection of Burmese rubies, the Cartier diamond set, and the sum of $4 million in liquid assets." Portia nodded, unsurprised. She'd been running those stores for the past 5 years anyway. To my youngest daughter, Cordelia Marie Vance, "I leave the international branches in Paris, Milan, and Tokyo, the vintage jewelry collection dating from 1890 to 1950, the workshop and all design patents, and the sum of $3.5 million in liquid assets." Cordelia smiled, already mentally cataloging her inheritance. To my son, Roland Gerald Vance, Mr. Whitfield paused, clearing his throat. Uncomfortably, "I leave the contents of the trunk in my bedroom closet, which he is to open only after my passing." The silence in the room was deafening. I felt my face burn as Portia actually laughed out loud, not even trying to hide her amusement. "That's it?" she said, turning to look at me. "The mysterious trunk? Oh, Roland, maybe it's full of gold coins, or Mother's secret diary where she confesses you were always her favorite." "Portia," Uncle Chester said sharply, but he was fighting a smirk himself. Cordelia at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Maybe there's something valuable inside, Roland. You know how Mother loved her secrets." Mr. Whitfield continued reading, detailing the division of Mother's properties. The Greenwich mansion went to Portia. The beach house in Martha's Vineyard went to Cordelia. The apartment in Manhattan was to be sold, proceeds split between the sisters. My name never came up again. "Is there anything else?" I asked, my voice sounding hollow even to me. Did she say anything about why? Mr. Whitfield shuffled his papers nervously. "There is a letter, addressed to you." He handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Mother's perfect script. I opened it there, my hands steady despite the humiliation burning through me. Inside was a single paragraph. "Roland, the trunk contains what you deserve. No more, no less. You chose your path despite my efforts to guide you toward success. Your sisters understood what it meant to be a Vance. You never did. Perhaps what you find inside will finally teach you the lesson you refused to learn. Some things are more valuable than money, and some truths are better left buried." "Cryptic to the end," Portia said, standing and smoothing her skirt. "Well, I have stores to run. Roland, do let us know if you find anything interesting in your inheritance. Maybe some moth-eaten clothes or father's old tax returns." After they left, Uncle Chester lingered. He stood by the window, looking out at the city below, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished. "Your mother had her reasons," he said finally. "Did she tell you what was in it?" I asked. He turned to look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw something like guilt in his eyes. "Go open it, Roland, but prepare yourself. Beatrice never did anything without purpose. The drive to Mother's house felt like a funeral procession for my dignity. The estate was already being prepared for Portia to move in. Most of the furniture was covered in sheets, and boxes lined the hallways. The trunk sat exactly where it had always been, looking smaller somehow, less mysterious, more like what it probably was. A final insult from a mother who'd spent my entire life telling me I wasn't good enough. I grabbed a crowbar from the garage, my hands shaking with decades of suppressed rage. 37 years of making me feel worthless, I said to the empty room. And this is your final joke. The lock broke with a satisfying crack that echoed through Mother's empty bedroom. Inside the trunk, instead of old clothes or worthless mementos, I found hundreds of letters, all addressed to me, all unopened. They were organized by year in neat bundles tied with string, starting from when I was 5 years old. The return address on every single one read, A. and D. Brennan, 4827 Sycamore Street, Riverside. I sat down, hard on the floor, my legs suddenly unable to hold me. The first bundle was labeled age 5 to 6 in someone else's handwriting, not Mother's. My hands trembled as I pulled out the oldest letter, postmarked just 2 weeks after my 5th birthday. The envelope was yellowed with age, but perfectly preserved. Inside, the handwriting was feminine but shaky, as if written by someone barely holding themselves together. Dear Roland, happy 5th birthday, sweet boy. We pray this letter finds you, though we fear it won't. Beatrice Vance has no right to keep you. You were stolen from us, and we've been fighting to get you back ever since. Your real name is Roland Brennan. I am your mother, Anita, and you have a brother, Damon, who cries for you every night. We won't stop fighting. We won't ever stop looking for you. The room started spinning. I grabbed another letter, dated 6 months later. Roland, the judge wouldn't listen. Beatrice's lawyers kept saying I was delusional, that I never had a son. But I have your birth certificate, your baby pictures, the blanket you loved with the little elephants on it. How can they say you don't exist when my arms ache to hold you? Damon asks about you every day. He's 7 now and refuses to let me pack away your toys. He says you'll come home soon. Letter after letter told an impossible story. According to Anita Brennan, I wasn't Roland Vance. I had been born Roland Brennan, son of Anita and Gerald, the same Gerald I'd called father, who died at his desk when I was 15. But in Anita's version, Gerald wasn't married to Beatrice when I was born. He was in a relationship with Anita, his secretary at the time. A letter from when I was 10 provided more details. Roland, the private investigator, found you. We saw you at your school concert. You played the piano so beautifully that I sobbed through the entire performance. We sat in the back row, as close as the restraining order allows. 500 feet, that's how close I can get to my own son. You looked right at us at one point and I wanted to scream, I'm your mother. That's your brother. But the police were watching. Beatrice made sure of that. I found legal documents tucked between the letters. Court filings, dismissed custody petitions, restraining orders filed by Beatrice claiming harassment from a delusional woman. There were DNA test results from a lab showing a 99.9% match between samples labeled Roland Vance, cup from public event, and Anita Brennan, mother. There were photographs taken from a distance, me at various school events, at graduation, even one of me teaching at Jefferson Middle School just last year. A letter from when I was 25 explained how it had happened. The truth is simple and horrible, Roland. Beatrice discovered I was pregnant with Gerald's child. She couldn't have children of her own, you see. The daughters she claims are Gerald's were from affairs she had, but Gerald stayed because he was weak and she had too much power over him. When you were 5, she orchestrated everything. She invited us on a family vacation to Lake Tahoe, pretending she wanted to make peace. She had me drugged at a restaurant, staged a mental breakdown, had me committed temporarily. By the time I was released 3 days later, she had already filed paperwork claiming you were her son, that I was a disturbed employee who'd become obsessed with her family. She had money, connections, judges she could buy. I had nothing but the truth, and in America, truth without money is just noise. The most recent letter was dated just a month ago. Roland, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The doctors say I have weeks, maybe days. I won't live to see Beatrice's death, but I know it's coming soon. Her brother Chester called us. His conscience finally broke after all these years. He says you'll get the trunk when she dies. If you're reading this, it means you've found the truth. Your brother Damon never married, never had children. He said he couldn't build a complete family when his was torn apart. We live at the same address, the house we bought when you were 3, the one with the big backyard where we were going to put a swing set. Please, if there's any part of you that wonders about us, come home. Just once, let me see my son as a free man, not through an investigator's camera lens. I stood up, letters scattered around me like evidence at a crime scene. 37 years of stolen letters, stolen life, stolen identity. I looked at the mirror on Mother's vanity and didn't recognize the man staring back. Who was I? Roland Vance, the disappointment? Or Roland Brennan, the stolen son? There was only one way to find out. I grabbed the most recent letter with the address, my car keys, and headed for the door. Riverside was 3 hours away. 3 hours to decide whether to drive toward a truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew, or turn back and pretend I'd never opened that trunk. I got in my car and started driving toward Sycamore Street. The house at 4827 Sycamore Street was nothing like the mansion I'd grown up in. It was a modest 2-story colonial with blue shutters and a garden full of roses that someone had lovingly maintained. A wooden swing hung from the oak tree in the front yard, the kind I'd always wanted as a kid but Mother said was too common for our neighborhood. My hands shook as I rang the doorbell at 9:30 at night. The door opened, and I found myself looking at a man who could have been me in a different life. Same brown eyes, same curved nose, but he was taller, broader, with the build of someone who worked with his hands. His face crumbled the instant he saw me. "Roland?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "I found the letters." Without another word, Damon pulled me into an embrace that felt like coming home after a war. He smelled like sawdust and coffee, and he was crying openly, without shame, the way men in the Vance family were never allowed to cry. "My God, you're here. You're actually here," he kept saying, pulling back to look at me, then hugging me again as if I might disappear. He led me inside to a living room that felt like stepping into a shrine. Every wall was covered with photographs of me at different ages, all taken from a distance. There I was at 8, playing Little League Baseball. At 12, receiving a music award at school. At 16, walking at Father's funeral. My high school graduation, my college graduation. Even one from last month conducting the Jefferson Middle School band at their spring concert. We never missed anything we could find out about, Damon said, following my gaze. Mom hired private investigators for years until the money ran out. Then we did it ourselves. I learned photography just to be able to capture you from far away. Where is she? Where's Anita? Where's our mother? Damon's face fell. He sat down heavily on a worn leather couch, gesturing for me to join him. She passed 2 weeks ago. She held on as long as she could, hoping Chester would grow a conscience. The day before she died, he finally called. Told us about the trunk, about Beatrice's will. Mom smiled for the first time in months. "He'll find them," she said. "He'll find the letters and he'll come home." The grief hit me like a physical blow. I'd been robbed of my mother twice, once at 5 and again 2 weeks ago. "Tell me everything. I need to know everything." Damon went to an old filing cabinet and pulled out folders thick with documents, photographs, newspaper clippings. He spread them on the coffee table like evidence in a case that had never been properly tried. "Dad, Gerald, wasn't married to Beatrice when you were born. They worked at the same accounting firm. She was a client relations manager and Mom was his secretary. Dad and Mom fell in love. Real love, not the business arrangement he later had with Beatrice. You were born in 1982, and Dad was planning to marry Mom. But Beatrice had been obsessed with Dad, and more importantly with his family money. He showed me a birth certificate. Roland James Brennan, born March 15, 1982, to Anita Brennan and Gerald Vance. Beatrice couldn't have children, though she hid that from everyone. When she found out about you, about us, she made her plan. She befriended Mom, pretended to accept the situation. She even offered to help Dad tell his family about us. That vacation to Lake Tahoe was supposed to be where everyone would meet and accept us as family. Damon pulled out a police report from 1987. Instead, she had Mom drugged at dinner. While Mom was unconscious, Beatrice took you. She had already prepared forged adoption papers, birth certificates claiming you were hers, everything. When Mom woke up in the hospital 3 days later, Beatrice had filed a restraining order, claiming Mom was a delusional former employee who'd become obsessed with her son. "But the DNA tests," I said, holding up one of the documents from the trunk. "We did 5 of them over the years. Every time we tried to use them in court, Beatrice's lawyers would claim contamination, lab error, fraud. She had judges in her pocket. We were nobody. She was Beatrice Vance, building her jewelry empire, friend to senators and governors." Damon showed me more photos, these ones older, me as a baby, a toddler, a small boy I didn't recognize as myself. In every photo, I was with Anita, a warm-faced woman with kind eyes and my exact smile, or with Damon, who even as a 7-year-old looked protective, his arm always around his little brother. The jewelry empire everyone thinks she built from scratch? That was started with Dad's family money, money that should have gone to support you and Mom. Portia and Cordelia aren't even Dad's biological children. Beatrice had affairs throughout their marriage, but Dad stayed. He thought he was staying for you, not knowing you were actually the only real thing in that whole twisted family. How did Chester know all this? He helped her in the beginning. He was the one who vouched for her story, who testified that you'd always been Beatrice's son. But guilt is a funny thing. It eats at you. He started sending us money anonymously about 10 years ago. Never enough to matter, but enough to let us know he hadn't forgotten. When Beatrice got sick, he called us, told us to wait, that the truth would come out. I looked at a photo of Anita holding me as a baby, both of us laughing at something off camera. She died thinking I didn't know. She died without ever hearing me call her Mom. The next morning, Uncle Chester showed up at the house on Sycamore Street. He looked older than his 70 years, wearing guilt like a heavy coat he couldn't take off. Damon opened the door but didn't invite him in, making Chester speak from the doorstep like the stranger he really was. "I know you hate me," Chester began, his usual commanding voice reduced to something broken. "I helped her do it. I thought I was protecting the family name, protecting Gerald from scandal. I vouched for her lies. I testified that you'd always been her son. I watched you grow up knowing the truth, and I said nothing. You watched her treat me like garbage for 37 years, I said, stepping beside Damon. You knew I had a real mother desperately trying to reach me, and you said nothing. I started sending the money, Chester said weakly. Blood money, Damon spat. 500 here, 1,000 there. You think that fixed anything? Our mother died of a broken heart that took 37 years to finally stop beating. Chester pulled out a thick envelope from his coat. This is everything. My sworn affidavit about what really happened, documents I kept, recordings I made of Beatrice admitting to it when she was on morphine near the end. It's enough to destroy her legacy, to prove the truth, maybe even to overturn the will. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. Why now? Because Anita called me a month ago. She was dying, and she didn't beg for herself. She begged me to make sure you learned the truth. She said she could die in peace if she knew you'd finally come home, even if she wasn't here to see it. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't honor that request. The legal battle that followed made headlines in every major newspaper. Jewelry heiress built empire on kidnapped child and stolen fortune. Portia and Cordelia initially tried to fight, hiring the best lawyers money could buy, but when Chester's testimony became public, when the DNA tests were verified, when the forged documents were exposed, their resistance crumbled. The jewelry empire dissolved within 6 months. Every store, every piece, every asset was liquidated. The courts awarded me everything as Gerald's only biological heir and as compensation for 37 years of false imprisonment. $16 million, they said, though no amount could buy back the decades I'd lost. I gave Portia and Cordelia each $1 million. They weren't to blame for Beatrice's crimes, even if they'd benefited from them. They were victims, too, in their way, raised by a woman incapable of real love. Portia took the money and moved to London, unable to face the shame. Cordelia stayed, and surprisingly, we've slowly built something resembling a sibling relationship. But the real inheritance wasn't money. It was the box Damon gave me a week after I arrived, filled with things Anita had saved. Every birthday card she'd bought but couldn't send. Recordings of her voice, talking to me, telling me about my first words, my favorite toys, the songs she used to sing. A baby blanket with little elephants on it, worn soft from where she'd held it every night for 37 years. I moved to Riverside permanently. Damon and I renovated our mother's house together, learning about each other with every wall we painted, every room we restored. He's an architect, designing homes for families, making sure everyone has the perfect backyard for children to play in. He never married, he told me, because he couldn't imagine building a complete family when ours was broken. But it's not broken anymore, he said one evening as we sat on the porch Mom had built, hoping one day we'd sit there together. I kept teaching, but now at Riverside Elementary. I started a music program for underprivileged kids who might not otherwise get a chance to find their voice. I named it the Anita Brennan Music Foundation. Every concert, I tell the audience it's named after my mother, a woman who never stopped fighting for what she loved. 6 months after the truth came out, I stood between 2 graves. On my left, Beatrice Vance's elaborate marble monument, already beginning to weather as fewer and fewer people came to visit. On my right, Anita Brennan's simple headstone that now read, "Beloved Mother, never stopped fighting, finally won." I placed roses on Anita's grave, the same kind she'd grown in her garden. I'm home, Mom. I'm finally home. Some prisons are made of bars, others are made of lies we're told so often we believe them. I spent 37 years as Roland Vance, the disappointing son who could never measure up. But I was always Roland Brennan, the stolen child who was loved beyond measure, fought for every single day and never forgotten. My real mother gave me something Beatrice never could, proof that I was worth fighting for. The trunk that was meant to be one final cruelty became my salvation. Beatrice thought she was leaving me worthless old letters. Instead, she left me the evidence of a love so powerful that death couldn't stop it, distance couldn't diminish it, and 37 years of lies couldn't erase it. $16 million in jewelry couldn't buy what was in that trunk. The truth, And the truth, it turns out, is priceless. The greatest inheritance isn't always money or property. Sometimes it's discovering who you really are, where you really came from, and that somewhere in this world, someone loved you with the kind of love that never gives up. My mother, my real mother, taught me that. And now, every day I wake up in the house where I was meant to grow up, with the brother I was meant to grow alongside, living the truth I was always meant to know. I was never a disappointment. I was just lost. And now, finally, I'm found. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below about a time when you discovered an unexpected truth that changed everything. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us that sometimes the greatest treasures come in the most unexpected packages. Thank you for listening to my story. Until next time, remember, the truth always finds a way.